Brothers and sisters, I want you to imagine this. The red sun rising over West Africa, the wind carrying whispers from the Sahel, and far, far across the ocean. Another flag rises, this time in the heart of the Americas. For the first time, the nation of Burkina Faso has planted its colors in Caracas, Venezuela. And this moment, this act, is not just paperwork. It is prophecy. It is Africa stretching her hand across the Atlantic once more, not in chains, but in freedom. Not to beg, but to build. Not to follow, but to lead. In an age where the world's powers still seek to dominate, one man, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, has dared to say no more. He has dared to dream of a new alliance, Africa and Latin America standing shoulder to shoulder. And that, my friends, is Africa news worth your attention. If you believe in a world where the forgotten rise again, subscribe now and walk with me, because today we witness not just diplomacy, but destiny. Caracas, Venezuela, the city of Bolivar, of rebellion and revolution, awoke to a new dawn. The air was heavy with meaning, the kind of day when history decides to breathe again. From across the ocean came a delegation carrying not gold, not guns, but a message. Africa is ready to stand tall. At the front of that delegation stood Burkina Faso's foreign minister, Karamoko Jean-Marie Traoré, the trusted voice of Captain Ibrahim Traoré himself. His presence was more than protocol. It was a declaration that a new bridge was being built, not of steel or stone, but of shared struggle and vision. When the Burkinabe flag was raised beside the Venezuelan tricolor, it was as if two continents long separated by pain and distance finally met again. Do you feel it, my brothers and sisters? This was no ordinary handshake. This was the echo of ancestors whispering through time. For 400 years, Africans were taken across that same ocean, chained, beaten, silenced. Now, Africa crossed the Atlantic once more, not as captive, but as comrade. Not to serve, but to stand. Not in sorrow, but in sovereignty. Inside the marble halls of Caracas, the ceremony began. Cameras flashed, officials smiled, but something deeper stirred. 22 cooperation agreements were signed that morning, in energy, in agriculture, in culture, in education. Each one a stone laid in the foundation of what could become a new global order. President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela welcomed the African guests with open arms. "We are united," he said, "by the same history of resistance, by the same desire to live with dignity." Those words, brothers and sisters, were not mere diplomacy. They were a hymn to independence, a hymn to courage, a hymn that says, "The South remembers." Burkina Faso, a small landlocked nation once dismissed as poor and powerless, was now being spoken of as a pioneer, the first Sahel country to plant its embassy in the Americas. And yet, behind the speeches, there was an understanding. This act would not go unnoticed, because when you stand for yourself, you always disturb someone's comfort. In the corridors of Ouagadougou, people spoke softly of what this meant. Farmers in the fields paused their work to talk about it. Students in classrooms whispered, "Have you heard? We are opening an embassy in the Americas." Mothers smiled with quiet pride. Elders nodded and said, "Thomas Sankara would be proud today." Yes, the spirit of Sankara, the revolutionary who once said, "He who feeds you controls you," could almost be felt in the air. This was more than policy. It was poetry. It was the continuation of a dream cut short too soon. Venezuela, a nation that had faced years of sanctions, isolation, and pressure from Western powers, found a kindred spirit in Burkina Faso. Both had refused to bow. Both had chosen dignity over dependence. And so, across the hall, as the ink dried on those 22 agreements, the message was clear. A new alliance was being born. One that spoke the language of the oppressed, the rhythm of resistance, and the melody of hope. The Western media barely mentioned it. There were no breaking news banners, no loud headlines. But for those who still believe that freedom is sacred, this was a trumpet blast, because when small nations dare to unite, the earth begins to tremble. And from the Sahel to the Caribbean, a whisper started to grow louder. What if Africa and Latin America, the two continents that suffered most under empire, now stood together? That question, brothers and sisters, was not mere curiosity. It was prophecy. For every empire that has ever ruled, there comes a moment when the silence breaks, when the oppressed find each other, and when the world changes course. And so, as the Burkina Faso flag waved proudly over Caracas, many celebrated. But in hidden rooms, far from the cameras, others began to worry, because when Africa rises, the old order trembles. When news of the embassy reached the world, some called it a diplomatic footnote. But others, the watchers of history, the students of revolution, knew better. They saw lightning flashing behind those polite smiles in Caracas. They heard thunder rolling behind the words mutual cooperation. Because they understood, this was not just another agreement. This was the first crack in the wall of Western dominance that had stood for centuries. The move startled the established order. For decades, the corridors of power in Washington, Paris, and Brussels had grown comfortable believing Africa would always follow, always depend, always wait. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré had done something unthinkable. He looked beyond them. He turned westward, not toward Europe, but toward Latin America, toward brothers and sisters who had fought the same battles, suffered the same exploitation, and dreamed the same dream of freedom. And the world noticed. African youth flooded social media with messages of pride. Venezuelan commentators spoke of a new dawn across the Atlantic. Pan-African activists called it a spark that could light the continent. But not everyone celebrated. In the high offices of the West, silence fell. The kind of silence that precedes a storm. Analysts whispered, "Burkina Faso? With Venezuela? What are they planning?" Headlines in European newspapers framed it as a strange alliance. Some called it dangerous, others symbolic. But none dared admit the truth. That small nations were learning to breathe without permission. And that, my friends, is the greatest threat to empire. For centuries, Africa was told to stay in its lane, to accept charity, to obey. But now, in a new century, the children of the Sahel had found their voice again. In Ouagadougou, crowds gathered around televisions and mobile phones, watching the ceremony replayed. In the markets, people spoke with pride. Our country has crossed the ocean. Taxi drivers, soldiers, students, all repeating the same name with reverence. Traoré. In the diaspora, in Harlem, in Atlanta, in Detroit, black elders nodded as they watched the images online. They saw reflections of a struggle they had once known, of the 1960s, of civil rights marches, of the Black Panthers' cry for self-determination. And they whispered, "It's happening again." Because every generation, brothers and sisters, must fight its own version of the same battle. In the past, the fight was for equality in the streets of America. Now, it is for sovereignty across the soil of Africa. This alliance between Burkina Faso and Venezuela sent a message deeper than any speech could carry. We, the forgotten, remember ourselves. The courage of Captain Ibrahim Traoré inspired millions. A soldier who became a leader who became a symbol that became a movement. Western commentators scoffed. "It will not last," they said. But those who have lived under oppression know that every great change begins with disbelief. For when the enslaved first dreamed of freedom, they were mocked. When the colonized first spoke of independence, they were ignored. And when a young African captain speaks of unity today, he too is dismissed. Yet time and truth have a way of rising, like the morning sun, slow, steady, unstoppable. In the Americas, Venezuelan officials celebrated. "This is not just cooperation," one diplomat said. "This is the meeting of two revolutions, Bolivar and Sankara shaking hands across time." Yes, brothers and sisters. Think of that image. Simón Bolívar, the liberator of Latin America, and Thomas Sankara, the voice of a free Africa, reaching out through centuries to say, "The struggle continues." That is what this alliance means. It is history folding back upon itself. Old wounds meeting new healing, old oppressors facing new defiance. And in that spiritual space where the past meets the present, a fire is lit. The fire of belief. But belief alone is never enough. For even as this fire spreads, shadows move. The question now is, who will try to extinguish it? And who will dare to keep it alive? Across the ocean, in glass towers and quiet offices, the news from Caracas began to ripple. Reports reached Washington, Paris, London. Small headlines at first, then briefings, then questions whispered behind closed doors. Why would Burkina Faso choose Venezuela? What does Captain Ibrahim Traoré want? And deeper still, the question they did not speak aloud. Is Africa learning to say no? The United States watched carefully. Official statements were polite. "We respect every nation's right to choose its partners." But beneath the politeness was unease, because when the world no longer seeks America's approval, that is when power begins to shift. For decades, Africa was seen as a prize. Its minerals, its oil, its votes in the United Nations. And now suddenly the Sahel, a region the West once dismissed as unstable, is forming its own path, its own alliances, its own voice. This, my brothers and sisters, is Africa news the world never expected to read. In Europe, commentators began to write in worried tones. Burkina Faso's leader follows a dangerous path. Venezuela's outreach to Africa threatens Western interests. They called it a populist gesture. But the people called it something else, freedom, because freedom has never been defined by approval. It has always been defined by courage. And courage is what Captain Ibrahim Traoré has in abundance. He stands among a new wave of African leaders, young, unyielding, unbought, who are no longer willing to trade independence for comfort. From Mali to Niger, from Guinea to Burkina Faso, a new rhythm echoes across the Sahel, drums of resistance beating once more. And beyond the Atlantic, in Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua, that rhythm is answered. The world, my friends, is changing its shape. The old empire still sits on its throne, but the ground beneath it is moving. The voices once silenced are singing again. It is not yet an earthquake? Not yet. But it is a tremor. And tremors, if left to grow, become revolutions. The West sees it, the global South feels it, and the elders of our community and you, my brothers and sisters, will always remember it. You've seen it before. When people rise, when unity stirs, when faith returns, the world rearranges itself. And so the question remains, will the great powers let this new order breathe, or will they strike before it takes its first full breath? The road ahead, my brothers and sisters, is long, but it glows with promise. From the dusty streets of Ouagadougou to the sun-washed plazas of Caracas, the same spirit moves, a spirit that whispers, "We are not small. We are not forgotten. We are rising." Burkina Faso and Venezuela have taken the first step. Embassies raised, agreements signed, hearts united. Yet a bridge is more than its first stone. It must be walked upon, strengthened, tested by time. The work has only just begun. In classrooms, new programs are being planned. Burkina students preparing to study in Latin America, Venezuelan engineers dreaming of the Sahel. In ministries, papers are being drawn for trade, grain for oil, knowledge for knowledge. And across both continents, a new idea is being born. Partnership without permission. The skeptics still mock. It won't last, they say. It's too ambitious. But they forget. Every great victory in history began with laughter from those who could not see beyond their own comfort. When the enslaved first dreamed of freedom, they were called foolish. When the colonized spoke of independence, they were called naive. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré speaks of sovereignty today, they call him dangerous. But he is only dangerous to those who depend on Africa's silence. To the people, he is a sign of courage. To the youth, he is proof that leadership can still be pure. To the elders, he is a reminder that Sankara's fire still burns. And for us, in the diaspora, watching from across oceans and generations, this story is more than politics. It is a mirror. Because when Africa stands tall, every black soul around the world stands a little taller too. When the Sahel finds its strength, the sons and daughters of Harlem and New Orleans feel their ancestors smile. That is the power of connection, not through empire, but through memory. This movement, this alliance, is still fragile. There will be storms, economic, political, even military. But storms, my friends, are not signs of failure. They are proof that you're sailing in the right direction. And so the road ahead will not be easy, but it will be ours. The road ahead belongs to those who still believe that dignity cannot be sanctioned, that freedom cannot be borrowed, that unity cannot be bought. The first embassy is only the spark. The question is, will the fire spread or will fear smother it before the dawn? Brothers and sisters, we have walked through history together tonight, from the Sahel to the Caribbean, from the deserts of Burkina Faso to the valleys of Venezuela. What we witnessed was not just diplomacy, it was deliverance. This is Africa news that does not fade when the cameras switch off. This is not gossip, not spectacle, but a signal that Africa is learning to write her own story again. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré chose to reach across the ocean, he did not only open an embassy, he reopened a wound and began to heal it. He reminded the world that the children once taken across that ocean now return not as slaves, but as sovereigns. He reminded us all that dignity is a right, not a request. And for you, my elders, my people of the diaspora, this moment is not foreign. You have seen the same courage before, in Montgomery, in Selma, in Memphis, when ordinary souls decided they would no longer bow to the powerful. What Burkina Faso and Venezuela did is an echo of your own history. The same faith, the same fire. So do not watch this story from a distance. This is your story too. When Africa rises, her children everywhere rise with her. When the motherland speaks, the world must listen. And now, as we stand at the edge of a new age, I ask you, what kind of future do you want your grandchildren to inherit? One ruled by fear and foreign command? Or one shaped by unity, by courage, by the grace of a people who remember who they are. Because the truth is, the new order is not something we wait for. It's something we build. So share this message. Speak of it in your churches, your homes, your barber shops, your community halls. Let the world know that Africa news is not tragedy. It is triumph. And remember this. Empires fall when the humble find their voice, and tonight that voice speaks again, through Captain Ibrahim Traoré, through the people of Burkina Faso, through every heart that still dares to believe. So, subscribe, share, and stand tall. Because this is how a new world begins.